Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this panel. As is well known, the market for green metals and minerals is expected to expand significantly with demand driven by the energy sector, especially the electrification of transportation, but also the development of wind and solar as renewable energy sources. Some estimations are that the demand for lithium should expand by about 12% compound annual growth to 2030, or by 5 times by 2040. By that same year, 2040, the demand for nickel is expected to double, and the demand for copper is expected to grow by 30%. Cobalt is projected to grow between 50 and 60%. This is demand, mind you, not supply. That's a different story. And that would be a compound annual growth rate of about 7%. The Economist estimates that about 1.2 trillion will accrue from the extraction of critical minerals annually by 2040. But there are challenges in sustaining the level of mineral output required by this growth, whether from the magnitude of capital investment for exploration and production, diminishing yields from existing sources, or social resistance from affected populations due to environmental, cultural, or other concerns. An enterprise of this magnitude also gives way to speculation at multiple levels and from many sectors that can result in misconceptions taking hold of the narrative. That is the motivation behind assembling a panel like the one we have here today, representing a varied array of expertise on the subject: urban design, geophysics, finance, and commodities trade, and political science. So let me introduce our panelists. At the far end, we have Robb, seasoned commodity markets professional who has worked on the physical commodity trading and private equity sides at Glencore and the equity futures investment side at PFM, a multi-billion dollar US-based hedge fund. He has also worked as an attorney and merchant banker in New York and Southern Africa, and as a self-employed consultant doing both investment due diligence and making recommendations for traditional long-short equity and futures investing. He has also been a senior analyst focused on batteries and battery and electric vehicle related metals. Next to Chris, we have Cristóbal Molina Baeza, a Chilean architect, researcher, and policymaker, currently serving as head of the architecture unit at the Ministry of Cultures, Arts, and Heritage of Chile, and visiting professor here at Tulane School of Architecture and the Built Environment. He co-directs with Rubén García Rubio the Atacama Desert Project, an interdisciplinary research initiative exploring the intersections of urban issues, water management, critical mineral extraction, renewable energy, and cultural heritage in one of the world's most extreme environments. Next, we have Cynthia Ebinger, a geophysicist with 30 years experience utilizing geophysical data and models to understand the structure and stress state in the subsurface for applications to mineral and energy resource assessment, reservoir injection extraction, fluid migration, and natural hazards. She's currently the Marshall Heape Professor at Tulane, but while a professor in the UK, she worked with major mining companies on regional analyses of crust in North and South America and Africa. Ebinger is a science advisor to the Department of State on critical minerals and energy. And last but not least, we have González, who holds a PhD in political science from the University of Notre Dame. He is a researcher at the National Council for Scientific and Technical Research, CONICET, in Argentina, associate professor at the Universidad Nacional de San Martín, and researcher at the Universidad Católica Argentina. He's currently a mid-career research fellow at the Center for Inter-American Policy and Research here at Tulane. His current research interests are the politics of lithium extraction and the local impacts of the green economy. So, I would like to get us started by asking each of our distinguished panelists to give us, in 5 minutes or so, their perspective regarding the key challenges and misconceptions about lithium, copper, nickel, and cobalt as they see them emerging today. We'll go in the other order that were listed in the program and as they are seated. So, Chris, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I prepared something, so I'm just going to make it simple and read what I prepared. On the challenges side, number one is just sort of law of big numbers on demand growth, coupled with a very capital-intensive supply response, which is somewhat unavoidable due to the capital-intensive nature of mining and recycling. Next challenge is China's lower cost of capital and CapEx, OpEx comparative advantage, and that's David Ricardo comparative advantage. And that's both absolutely and a first mover advantage in the lithium, mainly spodumene conversion, HPAL nickel, high pressure acid leach nickel, which is where most class 1 nickel is now being produced in Indonesia that way, and the cobalt nickel sulfate processing business. Next challenge, geographic concentration of cobalt supply growth, almost exclusively to the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Indonesia, and nickel supply growth in Indonesia and the Philippines. The recent nickel and lithium price spikes and fades lower. Nickel was up 75%, lithium went up 660%, have given pause and then fading downward, have given pause to incumbent miners and capital providers with respect to building and or financing the supply growth. And I guess the last challenge is cobalt's a byproduct, and therefore cobalt supply growth relies on DRC copper and Indonesian HPAL. So no, there's only one primary cobalt mine in the world, it's in Morocco. Cobalt does not grow because people are providing capital for cobalt. Misconceptions. First is misconception is that lithium, copper, nickel, or cobalt are scarce, either geologically or in the near-term supply. For instance, looking at existing mining producers and single project equity developers, measured and indicated resources is about 270 million tons of copper in the ground waiting for capital to go be provided to over a multi-year period to bring the mine into production and produce. That's about 9 times annual global demand right now. Same thing on nickel. I mean, Indonesia and to a lesser extent the Philippines have almost limitless lateritic nickel, which benefits from a saprolitic layer and a liminitic layer that can be used for different types of nickel production. The other misconception is that the Chinese conversion, smelting, refining domination is, quote, existential. Battery-grade lithium carbonate produced in Chile and Argentina can be easily converted into battery-grade hydroxide. That's what Livent and Albemarle are doing right now in the U.S. Same thing with nickel. I mean, Canadian nickel, class 1 grade nickel, can be put into battery-grade nickel relatively easy. I mean, it's a little bit expensive, but not a huge cost. I guess two others, misconception that commodity markets, either physical or future, are somehow broken and not functioning or an impediment to the required supply growth. Price signals still work. They lead to supply responses. The recent lithium price chart went up 660%, flood of supply, then 85% down below where, and now it's below where it started. Tons of supply got financed. And then the last one is that, that there's not a technical and price-related feedback loop which impacts demand. Whether it be cobalt in the cathode has now been reduced due to price and supply security concerns. Nickel in the class cathodes are being replaced by more manganese, again due to price concerns. So that's kind of my challenges and misconceptions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chris. Right on time, too. Cristóbal.
Thank you, Ludovico. Let me begin sincerely thanking the university for this invitation. You may be wondering what is an architect doing on such a technical panel alongside specialists in mining, geology, and political science. I believe the answer has 2 different dimensions. First, I come from Chile. Actually, I arrived some days ago. And Chile is a country with a long history of mining, closely tied to what we now call critical minerals. Chile is the world's largest producer of copper and the second largest producer of lithium carbonate. Nearly 1/3 of global lithium comes from the Atacama Desert, extracted from deep brines and processed in evaporation ponds. Chile is in fact the most cost-effective place for lithium production, and together with Argentina and Bolivia, forms the so-called lithium triangle. Second, I am here as co-director with Rubén García Rubio of the Atacama Desert Project at Tulane School of Architecture and Built Environment. Our research explores how urban design, infrastructure, and public space can address the social and ecological challenge of the Atacama Desert, the oldest and driest desert on Earth. This fragile and unique ecosystem is now seen as a global sacrifice zone, marked by extreme aridity, water scarcity, and profound ecological and social tension. In Atacama, water is disputed among mining, agriculture, energy, and local communities, with a context of mega drought and desertification driven by climate change. The Atacama Desert is also home to nearly 1.5 million people, many living in poor conditions, exposed to pollution, and inhabiting ancestral indigenous lands with unique cultural heritage. At the same time, Atacama is a land of opportunities. It has the highest solar radiation on the planet, ideal for renewable energy, and is one of the world's best locations for astronomical observation. For all these reasons, Chile plays a key geopolitical role in the context of the energy transition. My goal today is to expand the conversation. Critical mineral extraction is not only about production capacity and economic profits. We must also consider the urban, ecological, and cultural impacts, which too often remain outside the debate. Let me highlight 3 common misconceptions. 1, mining is often seen as the sole driver of progress, but the real challenge is sustainable extraction management using cleaner methods like direct liquid extraction and desalinating water in the processes. 2, energy transition is automatically green. While copper and lithium are essential for clean technology, their extraction has an important environmental footprint. 3rd, mining always benefits local communities. Royalty and taxes often fail to improve the quality of life, and tension with indigenous people and communities over environmental issues can paralyze operations. These raise fundamental questions. It is sustainable to extract critical mineral in fragile ecosystems like Atacama for the energy transition of developed countries? Is it fair if this process increases inequalities and leaves negative impacts in the very regions that hold those resources? In conclusion, I would like to say that the Atacama Desert embodies the paradox of our time. It is both a global sacrifice zone and a global hope for the transition to clean energy. The way we balance extraction, ecosystem, and community development will determine whether the energy transition is truly sustainable and fair.
Thank you, Cristóbal. Cynthia?
Yes, I feel very privileged to have been so nicely set up for some comments that I'll make about the environmental, societal, and governance issues that have been the topic of conversation today, ESG versus profit. And if we step out of the box and look back at mining in a different way, and there are many who are looking to see that happen, including colleagues in Chile, what we can do is modify the regulatory environment and look at mines or the mine waste, which is a cost. It has a big cost. Any company that maintains tailings or the waste from mining, and the waste, yeah, let me just explain. There's a ratio of rock extracted to what the metal that you want. For gold, it's 1 to 1 million. A million tons for one. So anytime we want to look at something like a rare earth, well, we're 1,000 or 10,000 for the ratio of rock to metal. So we're leaving waste behind. And many times a mining company has a permit to extract 1 or 2 metals, but there's other products there. And there's an entire movement, there's a recent paper advocating for a change for byproducts of what had been called waste, but is valuable. And we have, and going back to Mr. Tudor's talk this morning and talking about the benefit of innovation coming from federal laboratories and research institutions, we are at that point now. Our government laboratories have low water lithium extraction methods that are scalable now. We have ways to extract rare earth elements from coal waste. It's going to depend on how the coal was burned and how hot in different areas, and it has to be evaluated place to place, but we can do it. We have these technologies that we can employ, and we can actually go to sites and remine. Here's a good example. The state of Michigan alone has 800 abandoned mines. And those mines have waste. Many of them were from the time when there weren't regulations and their environmental challenges. In December, the US passed the Good Samaritan Act, saying that any company can now come in and remine an old site as long as they contribute, I think it's 10, maybe 15% to supersite to clean up the harms of the past without inheriting all of those. We're working on, the federal agencies are working on designating 15 sites in the US within the next few months to employ these techniques and deploy some of these new technologies. So now, more than ever, we need these partnerships between the companies, academics, and the federal laboratories to implement these strategies and work with countries like Chile. Chile right now has done a partial evaluation of the inventory of what they have in mine waste. The US has completed their inventory of mine waste. There's a paper in Science from a few weeks ago cataloging this and what's available. And these mine waste reuse fill a very large hole. There's still gaps, the heavy rare earths and others, and that gap for these other elements is in our recycling. If we had an efficient collection system, every disk drive would have the corner cut off, and all of those rare earths that we desperately need as strong magnets, niobium magnets, to turn the wind turbines and to do a lot of other things as well, we would be collecting and retrieving a large proportion of what we need. Not everything, but we would be moving towards that, and we would have cleaned up the mess that costs all of us, and costs every country for that. So efficient recycling of materials and a strategy for recycling of all EV batteries. Yes, there are problems with lithium and transportation, but there are ways around that as well. We are making it happen in California, in Hawaii. So the three things I would say is we're at a stage where if we change the way we looked at mining, we can have our ESG and our profit if we count the cost of leaving waste and the cleanup of that as well, and the harm done to our communities and the harm, all of these ESG pieces. So I just say that we can start to get to that point if we were making big changes in the way that we approach extracting the minerals. So thank you.
Thank you. Lucas.
Thank you, Ludovico. Mitigation requires lithium extraction. And extraction, as you already heard, can impose harmful effects for the environments and the livelihoods of local communities where the minerals are mined, especially focusing on our research, group of researchers, we have been working on the lithium triangle, Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. One common misconception is that companies and government either should or should not care about these local impacts. And our research shows that there are larger implications for both of them beyond normative and ideological positions that are linked to the political sustainability of this sector. What we show is that when there is extraction, there are actually three possible outcomes. One is imposition of the terms of extraction. It is not very common, but it happens. It requires a very strong mining company with a large scales and large mobility, weak governments, usually electorally weak and low capacity national governments that are not politically allied with some national ones, against uncoordinated and isolated local communities in remote locations. This happened, for example, in the case of Argentina, in the Phoenix Enlivened project in Salar del Hombre Muerto, Catamarca, but it changed after 2018. During this period, when the mine started extracting, it was in 98 until 2018, there were minor concessions to local stakeholders, but with visible environmental impact, conflict with local communities increased, and protests and mobilizations escalated. The second outcome is community resistance and aborted extraction. And that happens when local communities are mobilized, they are coordinated, they are strong, and they get support from external allies through transnational action networks. And this is usually against mining companies and pro-mining governments, which can be supportive of mining at the very beginning against communities, but then turn when the conflict is very salient and visible. That happened in Salinas Grandes in Jujuy, in Argentina, and it has been happening in Bolivia for a long time with at least two failed projects in Salar de Uyuni. Here, we have no concessions to local stakeholders, and depending on the distribution of minerals, mining companies and governments can pivot mining to less contentious areas. But the thing is, you don't have extraction, and you don't have minerals for the green transition. Still, imposition and anti-extractive resistance are not the only outcomes. The terms of extraction may be negotiated, and that happens when you have strong national governments, usually with strong state capacity, bureaucratic and professional capacity, allied with some national units, with coordinated and strong local communities that decide to negotiate with mining companies. This happened with SQM in Salar de Atacama, and it happened in Liven, as I told you, after 2018. And in both cases, that happened after huge corruption scandals in which the mine companies were involved. Here, we have some concessions to local stakeholders, economic compensation, community empowerment, more environmental protections, and sometimes developmental spillovers. So our comparative analysis of lithium mining project illustrates a range of possible outcomes associated with the extractive side of the energy transition. It provides warning notes to those willing to impose the terms of lithium mining and a list of possible benefits to those willing to engage not only in a more equitable, but fundamentally more sustainable mode of extraction. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Very interesting perspectives. I have some follow-up questions for each of you. I think 2 minutes each, so that we'll have time left to open up for some Q&A. And Chris, there's a lot of talk about dysfunctional commodity markets, right? The price of lithium now is what, 10% of what it was, or it collapsed by 90%?
It's about 12 or 13%,
right.
But that's close enough. Yeah.
So what lessons do we derive from that? I mean, can we rely on commodity markets to guide us going forward?
I guess That's a good question. The question about relying on them is what's the alternative?
Yeah, right.
But I guess coming back to the issue, lithium is a good example, nickel was another one.
Or is volatility a given, and how do we deal with that?
I do think I would start with immature markets and mature markets. Lithium is an immature market. It was a market that grew at GDP forever and then suddenly, bang. You'd have to go back. Iron ore in 2009 and 10 is the last example of a commodity growing at a double-digit compound annual growth rate, and that was for like 2 years. Lithium will grow at 12 to 18% for the foreseeable future. Because of that, the supply and demand mismatches lead to volatility. And the other thing with lithium, compared to copper, which doesn't do this, is that because of the size of it, is lithium doesn't have a futures market. So you don't have non-industrial participants being able to speculate, provide liquidity, and speculators obviously get a bad name, but speculators provide liquidity, and that would, in lithium, for instance, there's no doubt if lithium went from, I think, $10,000 to $70,000 a ton, and if you had a futures market, you would have had speculators hitting that short, hitting it, and it wouldn't have gone that high. That's just very clear.
So deeper markets is what we need.
I mean, a development of, and the interesting thing with futures markets is the last successful metal in the LME was aluminum in 1978. The industry hates it because they want it to be not to have a futures, because then they can, you essentially can squeeze the market higher and make more money, which most people would say, well, that you shouldn't be able to do that. The other problem with commodities, the nature of them is that I always use coking coal in a blast furnace. If you're running a blast furnace, which is a continuous chemical reaction, and you run out of coke, that's a $50 million problem you have. Just take that thing down and restart it. So you'll pay any price for the coke. And that, in one sense, a lot of commodity markets have that, where a scarcity comes in and people will just pay whatever the number is. The bigger the market is, the more developed it is, you see less of that. I mean, the oil market goes crazy, it goes to $100. Right now it's 65. The copper market goes crazy, it goes to 12. Right now it's 9,800. So lithium is an immature market, and that's what we had. Nickel's a little different, smaller market. There was definitely a squeeze on the LME where you're pushing shorts against the wall, having to cover, and then the LME came in and said, trades are over, we have a non-functioning market, if you were making money, too bad your trades ripped up. All the hedge funds got pissed, sued, they lost. You sign up to use the market gets to decide when things could go crazy. So, I mean, I guess I think markets work, they're imperfect. Most markets are actually, for futures, are relatively regulated, so it's not like a question we have on regulated markets. I think it's the nature of commodities in one sense. There's an old saying in the oil business, the cure for high prices is high prices, the cure for low prices is low prices.
Excellent, thank you. Cristóbal, to you now. Could you say a bit more about the challenges of cultural and environmental preservation that are posed by extractive activities in the Atacama? You alluded to them in your presentation.
First, I believe that we must remember that critical mineral extraction in the Atacama Desert takes place in ancient territories with thousands of years of history, where the extraction takes place, for example, in salt flats, springs, or mountains, are part of the cosmovision of the indigenous people. At the same time, there's 1,000 years of archaeological history there, paleontological heritage, for example, geoglyphs, and also ancient construction and infrastructure, and even pre-Hispanic cemeteries. Also, we need to consider that there's some environmental issues in the Atacama Desert affecting people and communities. The pollution in the water, the air, and earth, and also this dispute about water availability. In my opinion, one of the main challenges is in relation with royalty and taxes from the large-scale mining extraction. So the big question is how all these mitigation process are taking place, for example, in the urban condition of this community. It is important to address these social and cultural and environmental problems generated by extraction with quality in the investment in communities. So I think it's important to take the opportunity, for example, to clean the water bodies in these territories, to reduce pollution, to protect biodiversity, and the creation of community space with identity and cultural preservation heritage. Sometimes this investment failed. They don't have the impact in community, and I think it's a big problem because if inequalities are growing in the territory, I think it's something that can paralyze, for example, the investment, and it can have a negative impact. So I think its quality is so important in order to invest the mitigation money in a better way in the urban conditions, in the quality of life of people living in the Atacama Desert.
Excellent, thank you. Cynthia, your perspective about reducing the load on extraction by reuse and recycling is very interesting. What are the barriers that keep us from doing more of that?
In the US, the biggest obstacle is collection rates. And California has ramped up the collection rate. Hawaii has a strong collection policy, and they have return centers. But we're in a situation now where Europe has a whole set of guidelines, and they have collection sites for virtually everything. There are more cell phones in Europe than anywhere else in the world, apparently. But there are sites and there are companies that are developing or enhancing these, the profitability of the recycling business, and they're really centered in Europe, and we're falling behind. And that part's clear, and it's, I think the piece for any of these startups, many of which have gotten their start through DOE funding, for here in the US, I mean, is that we don't have fast enough collection rates. So if we were to do that, and an obvious one is, there are universities all over the place, and where can you find more laptops and computers in one small space than in a university? But there are ways that we could start this and move it forward, and we also have the example in New Orleans of glass half full, where the glass recycling is in part a community effort and volunteerism. So we know we can do it. And the US has always been great about recycling. 92% of all of our steel is recycled. We do this. This is all so I think, making it happen and seeing it happen now, and it's probably going to need to come city by city or region by region to pull this out. So that's part with that, that's one of the biggest obstacles with the recycling. And I think it's also awareness and having folks realize there are other challenges, like say car dealers that had incentives for EVs, and people who bought them with that EV can then sell their used car, and I can see it driving in Nairobi. But wait a minute, wasn't that our taxpayers' money that gave the incentive? Are we sure we want to be exporting those valuable metals? Did we think about that? So it's trying to look at keep the circularity, work through the process, and really value it. And I think there are ways that we can do it, and the U.S. has always been great in this area.
Excellent, thank you. And now to Lucas. I'd love to hear about practical implications of comparative research. And so What is the single most important lesson, if you had to pick one, that we can derive from your work to generate a win-win situation between companies and communities?
Excellent question. First of all, can there be two?
Yes, even better.
The single most important thing is that you cannot assume that communities will tolerate everything. Once you turn their support, you don't really know what's going to happen. And that is clearly the case in Bolivia, for instance. Cerro Rico in Potosí provided silver to the Spanish Empire for generations. It is calculated that 5 million people die there. And it's very difficult to mine even today in Salar de Uyuni.
Right.
And there has been a lot of resistance against lithium mining in Bolivia, even when a left-leaning, progressive, allied to social communities, to social movements, government, try to do that with a public company. It is very unlikely that Bolivia will mine any lithium in the short run. And that happened also in Argentina, in a community that got activated. 33 communities got together and stopped a mining project. Of course, it moved to another location. Actually, the company from the Bolivian side went to Argentina. It has been mining in Catamarca for decades. But it's very difficult to revert that. So the first lesson, do not mess a lot extremely with communities. And the second one is that we really need state capacity to negotiate the terms. Because, and the state capacity is usually higher at the national federal level. Right. Local government, and that is a problem with Argentina, provinces are the owners of natural resources, according to the Constitution. So they have less capacity to negotiate and less political clout to do that. But it's not only about twisting an arm, it's about setting the terms that are sustainable. And national governments with strong bureaucracies, professional bureaucracies, can help communities negotiate those terms.
Thank you. We have time for some questions from the audience, if there are any.
Yes. Would you please contextualize U.S. critical minerals potential, which minerals in which states, and what federal or state policies that would be needed to stimulate domestic mining and processing?
I can start and pass it over. We still have a federal, the U.S. had a strategy to revise our federal mining code, but it didn't happen during the last administration, and so it's still ongoing. We still have staking claims as a prospecting. So there are challenges, but then there's also some great progress that's been made, and with this Good Samaritan Act that came about last year and the ability to move forward. I think within the U.S., the other challenge is that it's at least 7 years from the investment and the idea of a mine to actually starting production. And part of that, a large part of that, is working with the community. And there are examples of mines that were permitted and started production within 3 to 4 years. And the reason they were able, and this was in Alaska with indigenous communities, and it happened because the mining companies talked to the communities from the day that they started flying the geophysical surveys to start to image the subsurface. So the biggest challenge is the community, as we've been talking about, and in working with the community and having them on board and having them say, okay, these are the profits, do you need childcare? Do you want a new high school? I mean, what is it that the community needs, and working with them? So bringing that time from discovery to opening. The second is being able to now to mine the previous waste that's now been inventoried across the country, and then within the U.S., obviously the processing piece. And to have processing, you get, like, you reduce your metal, you have all this rock left over, and you still then need like 99% purity, and you'll have a factory that nobody really wants in their backyard. And they're really expensive. So that means that you would maybe have one that would serve a very large area. So a hub and spoke technology is a really important piece, or a hub and spoke process is really important. Yeah, so I don't think it's really the regulatory environment, it's actually all of these components, and ESG is a big piece.
Chris, you want to add?
Was the question about rare earths or about all mining?
I understood all.
I think I was going to say that one of the things that the previous administration did and the current administration are doing is they have identified the problem. The previous administration was very focused on using the government to essentially finance some things which either wouldn't be financeable or would take a long time, and to get that stuff going. Thacker Pass, a lithium mine in Nevada, is the best example of that.
Right.
Another one called Ioneer, which is a lithium boron mine, and there was another one. And that certainly will, because Cynthia mentioned one of them is engaging with the community, the other one is just getting the money.
Right.
I mean, people, they'll do their pre-feasibility study, their feasibility study.
Guaranteeing
They
viability.
have to raise, these are very capital-intensive businesses, and there's this thing called the law of big numbers.
Right.
It's easier to raise $600 million with a 20% IRR than it is to raise $2 billion at a 40% IRR. Just hard, big amounts of money are hard to raise. The current administration is taking a slightly different approach, which is essentially trying to basically, it would appear to say, we're going to really try to not, we're going to permit really, really fast. Some people would say, without looking very closely. And we're going to try to, because one of the things is, return on investment is when the money goes in, how long does it take to start generating cash flow? They're trying to shorten that process. And then on the rare earth side, what they did with a California-based rare earth miner is somewhat unprecedented. They actually gave them guaranteed pricing. That's never been done before, and that's a big deal because project finance, guaranteed pricing from the Department of Defense, I will lend you the money like that.
Right. Do we have another question?
What are the key technology gaps and therefore innovation opportunities around recycling our most critical minerals?
Technology.
It's funny, my private equity client is right now looking at a Series C fundraising for rare earths recycling, which is, they've raised Series A and Series B. That is, I would say, an area where, and I can, because I'm under non-disclosure, but there is a lot of smart people thinking about, because what happens in any of this stuff is when it wasn't that interesting economically or for whatever, or strategically, people didn't really think about it. Once they start thinking about it, good minds get to work and we start getting technological efficiency, manufacturing efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the problem is being addressed.
Cynthia, would you like to add?
Well, there's so many creative ways now. There's the biological fixation of metals and folks from southern Louisiana actually know probably that sugarcane concentrates arsenic. Well, there are a lot of metals that actually we can be smart and use them, and there are companies that digest circuit boards and get the gold and silver concentrated in algae. And we need to do more. We need to do more, faster. People have poo-pooed or not given the investment thought until it started to become profitable. And now that we can see that, I think more investment in that area. And there's a lot going on in our government laboratories, but it's not yet to scale. So making that happen. And I think that's an important piece in a lot of the other metals. And trying to avoid, and particularly with the recycling, if we have a smelter in a country transport the metals that can only be extracted that way to that site rather than making more of these energy demanding sites. So this hub and spoke concept.
Cristóbal, there's a technological frontier in lithium too, right? Does Chile provide any lessons, examples in 15 seconds?
I think it's in the process, and it is important to produce technology as well, because countries like Chile is producing lithium, but also need to create new technologies in the extraction and also enter in the business of battery and other things. So I think it's important not just to rant about the process, also to create technology and produce technology.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you for being disciplined and staying within your times, and thank you all for your attention.
We did it.
Thank you all for joining us for this session. This concludes our programming for the day, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning at 8:30.